I'll start with introducing myself. Thank you so much for joining me for the meeting. I'm Violet, first year at May at Queens. I'm doing this project on fashion in Chinese diaspora. It was interviewing. Would you mind to share a bit about yourself?
Sure. My name is Tzang. I'm currently the director curator of the Chinatown Storytelling Center. My background is as a curator. Previous to this, I was the curator of cultural communities at the Royal Alberta Museum for about 14 years, but I grew up in Vancouver, but we immigrated in the early 70s from Taiwan. So I'm a first generation immigrant. We were the first generation of Chinese immigrants to arrive in Canada under the changes to the Immigration Act. So when it went to the point system. So we're the first generation of Chinese immigrants who were not Cantonese.
Oh, yeah. Your family were before immigration Mandarin speaking.
Yes. So that meant that when we arrived in Vancouver, there wasn't that ready-made community for us. Our experience as immigrants was very different. I mean, we shopped in Chinatown because at the time that was the only place to shop. But our associations with Chinatown are very different because we didn't speak any of the Cantonese dialects.
When you settle in Vancouver Chinatown and there's the language barrier, was that the first stop after your immigration?
No, aside from shopping, we lived outside of Chinatown. We didn't have that everyday association with Chinatown. So nowadays you can find Chinese restaurants everywhere. But when we came, Chinese restaurants were in Chinatown. But we didn't recognize the Chinese food because it was Cantonese food.
Oh.
So the first time I had dim sum was in Canada.
What?
In Chinatown. I would argue that up until the early 70s, close to 90 to 95% of the Chinese in Canada were specifically Cantonese and mostly originally from the Pearl River Delta region. It all has to do with the changes in the immigration law, right? So between 1923 and 1947, the Chinese Immigration Act was in place. So there was virtually no immigration from China to Canada during that period. And then in 47, they repealed the act. So yes, in theory, Chinese immigration was now open, but it was limited to family reunification. It isn't until 67 that the immigration laws changed to the point system. And that's when you get that more diverse Chinese immigration starting. So we came in 72. We were one of that first wave because, it takes a couple of years to process everything. So we're part of that first wave. Right?
And were these differences and challenges perceived? What was the reason for your family, your parents decided to move right after the point system was established?
My parents' decision to leave Taiwan was entirely personal. So our standard of living went down quite considerably. But my parents were absolutely aware that their standard of living would go down. They didn't go in with delusions. Oh, but some people think that, I was an engineer, I'm going to be an engineer in Canada.
And they can't find the same job, right?
Yeah. And then they're surprised, when they get here. Whereas my parents were absolutely aware that if they did this, my father would not have the same job and the same economic resources, and they did it anyways. Because we had economic resources in Taiwan, this gets into your fashion question.
Of course.
Right? So my father was the first mate on container ships. So he was a sailor. He's been to every major port in the world as part of his job. But what he always brought back from my mother was clothes. He either brought her clothes or he brought her textiles or he brought her magazines so that she could have fashion. Fashion and jewelry. He bought her a lot of jewelry as well.
Fashion and jewelry from international destinations.
So in terms of that, our family's outlook on that is going to be significantly different from other people.
In Taiwan or in Canada?
Just everywhere, right? I mean, there weren't that many people in that era who traveled.
Yes.
like my father, right? For example, part of my mother's wedding jewelry is silver filigree jewelry that he bought in Iran, because that's what they were known for, and we still have the pieces. She kept all of it, right?
Yes.
She has opals from Australia. Her wedding ring is diamonds from South Africa. So her outlook on clothing and fashion was very different. And then, when I was born, there are pictures of me. I have an entire little red riding outfit with a little kilt that's from England. I think I was 4 in that picture, and a Pucci pantsuit.
Pantsuit as a kid.
Yeah, my dad was in Italy. He bought the fabric and the pattern, and my mom had it made up for us. I think it was too loud for her, which is why she made it into one for me. The whole concept that you could go to a store and buy clothes in different sizes really doesn't get going until the 50s. Prior to that, most people would go to a seamstress. Businesses like Pucci, they started out as a textile manufacturer. So you could go to the shops in Italy and buy Pucci and then have somebody make up the clothing for you. So that's what my dad did, was he would go to fabric stores, buy fabric for my mom, or where that wasn't possible, like he'd be in the States and that's a little bit more difficult, he would get her the newest magazines and the newest catalogs, and then she would just take them to a seamstress in Taiwan, point to it and say, yes, that's what I want.
Well, the same.
Yeah, and they would just make up a version of it for her, right? So so our association with fashion, but it also goes back to my grandma, right? My grandma came from a very wealthy family in northern China, and she remembers, as a child, sitting in a carriage with a fur muff, being dressed up like a little Western doll. Yeah, like a little Western princess. And she's talking early 1900s. And if you're wearing Western dress in the 1900s, you're at the upper classes. So our family's association with fashion is very different, which is why my mother never objected to the clothes I wore in the 80s.
There was no conflict. Was like, you want to wear more loud pieces and go with like the more trendy things.
Yeah, no. And there was never any conflict about me spending money on it, because that's what we did. I mean, to this day, my mother's wardrobe is very extensive. If she sees something and she likes it and she can afford it, she's going to buy it. The only question that was ever raised if we wanted to buy new clothes was, could we afford it? And that was it. It wasn't, should we have it?
Yes. So would you say that your family environment growing up is like liberating and supportive in that sense?
Yes, in that sense, yeah. Our family was probably weirdly a bit more traditional than a lot of families of my generation. When I was 3, apparently I was reciting Sung Dynasty poetry. I don't remember any of it.
I can relate.
But I think they were trying to already instill that classical Chinese education, right? So in that sense, we were brought up understanding our culture, understanding our value, that stuff. So we had that kind of a traditional education, which I think a lot of kids in my generation wouldn't have received. But that was, again, my family, it was part of that educated elite.
Yes.
No, but that's what you do, right? You don't necessarily do that if your family is from the peasant class. And it's not a criticism, it's just a reality. So that's what I mean by, in that sense, we grew up with a very traditional
education and
education.
Also like behavior.
I brought home a report card and it was A's and a B, and then it was like, why do you have a B? Well, it was in phys ed. Oh, okay, then we don't care. Yeah. Oh, that's fine, we don't care. When I went to university, it didn't matter what I studied, but he did care that I went and started my PhD, that I did my master's degree. It didn't matter what it was. The investment was in education.
So you still have a lot of like decision-making power. And moving to like the fashion
Yeah.
session, during your coming of age, what clothes would you wear on an everyday basis?
Honestly, I'm going to push my fashion awareness back to much younger. My mother stopped dressing me when I was about 7.
And you started to pick up your own clothes in elementary school?
Yeah. Yeah. You know, because for us, shopping was the way we bonded. So we went shopping together and bought clothes together. So I was picking out things even from the store at the age of 7. I didn't pick up my entire wardrobe, right? Because a lot of the wardrobe was hand-me-downs.
Yes.
You know, we got things from other people, but I distinctly remember being able to go into a store and saying, I would like this. She was willing to buy me a dress. I could pick the dress that I wanted.
Mhm.
So I was always able to pick an element of my wardrobe. And then even with the hand-me-downs, you know, we'd get a box and then I was wearing things that I wanted to. And if I didn't want to wear them, I didn't wear them. I do remember sometimes she was surprised by the time she got home from work and then I would come home from school. And sometimes she'd be like, what did you wear? But too late, you know, I'm already home, right? So yeah, so I started dressing myself really from a very early age and made those fashion decisions from a very early age. And I was always consulted. Even before that, I remember being asked when I was a kid, like a very young kid, did I want to wear this? Or did I like this? I have a memory of there's a particular outfit from when I was probably 3 or 4. And I remember being asked, you know, do you want to wear this? Do you like it? It wasn't just sort of, you know, being dressed like a doll and saying, there you go. It was, do you want to wear this? Right. So that was part of my education.
Yes. How would you select clothes? Like, do you at that time buy clothes from stores?
Yeah, mostly department stores. I'm just trying to think. Yeah, primarily department stores. That's where most people shopped then. Couldn't afford boutiques.
What were your favorite like brands or styles back then?
I mean, then not so much brands, because you know, what do you really know about brands as a teenager? You know, that whole concept of brands really comes out in the 80s. You know, so when I'm in my later teens, then it's, you know, you got to wear the polo, you got to wear Daniel Hector t-shirt or the sweatshirt, you know, all of that really comes in when I was probably around 15 is when all of that started. Before that, you just wore stuff. The very first time I remember branding was jeans, designer jeans, right? Gloria Vanderbilt jeans, you know, the very first sort of really branded item. And I remember wanting those jeans, right? Because everybody wanted a designer jean. And we couldn't afford it. Style was important. Achieving a certain look was important, but not necessarily the brand. You know, that designer thing
Yes.
wasn't so important that I would
Yes.
save up for it.
And how did you form your personal style at the coming of age?
I don't know. I just did. I mean, like I said, I've been dressing myself since I was 7. So that was, you know, my styles were pretty consistent. It just evolved. But there were certain decisions I made even as a teenager, right? I didn't want to look like everything in the magazine. When the whole branding thing became a real big thing, everybody was wearing the polo shirts, you know, everything with a logo on it, the Benetton, all of that. And when that was sort of going crazy, I made the decision that I did not want to pay for the privilege of advertising for somebody else.
Yes, so you can crave out your own like style.
Yeah. So
Taste.
to this day, I don't wear logos.
Yes.
If something's too logo, I don't wear it. I don't want it. I don't own it. So I don't own purses with a whole lot of logos and stuff on. I just don't. It's still a thing for me. I don't want to advertise. So if you know, in the 80s, if you take that position that you don't want to wear anything with logos, it totally changes what you can wear.
Because everything else was big logos.
Yeah, everything, everybody was wearing those things with all the logos on them. And if you choose not to wear logos, it changes what you can wear. Plus, you're a teenager and a lot of it has to do with the music that you listen to,
Yes.
and I was not listening to what a lot of people in Vancouver at the time was listening to. Right. I was listening to English glam, English with new romantics, right? So Duran Duran, things like that, that Spandau Ballet, all stuff like that, that ABC, that wasn't necessarily
Mainstream.
mainstream. Yeah. And that new romantic look. That's a very specific look.
How would you describe that look and what attracted you?
Yeah, well, it was bright, it was glamorous, and it was happy. A lot of the looks in the 80s,
Got punk, punky.
yeah, I mean, the punk didn't really draw me because it was too dark. It was just, real punk versus what it is now. But real punk was very violent, and I wasn't into that. Right. So the new romantic look sort of took elements of punk, but it wasn't violent.
But it was more like happy and classic in some way.
Yeah, and it was less embellished. To this day, I don't really wear things with a lot of embellishment. I sort of, the silhouettes are very defined. I think that's what still carries over from the 80s, is the very defined silhouette. And you could be mismatched. That's still a legacy from the 80s, that new romantic look had mismatched things. That's also that legacy from punk into that new romantic look, right? But you could be mismatched and it was intentional and it was fun. And you could be eccentric and it was good.
Do you mismatch a lot of colors or different streams?
Well, in the 80s, the mismatch was things like everything was asymmetrical. Yeah, so to this day, I have two piercings.
What, like one earring?
And one. Right? I used to wear like one earring that came all the way down like this, something a little short here, and then something big and round here.
That kind of asymmetrical. I remember reading like some of your donated items to the museum catalog, and there is a mention to a pair of earrings saying that they were never worn as a pair.
So so there was stuff like that, right? Even things like neon socks.
Not the same pair.
Yeah, like one foot would be blue and one foot would be yellow, but they were double layered neon socks, right? So you were supposed to wear them with part of it peeking out. So I'd wear one inside out.
Yes.
So that, they were obviously a pair.
Yes.
They weren't paired, right? So it would be things like that. I think the appeal for that look was the ability to make those decisions and that it would still fit with the look, with that style. Whereas I found with a lot of other styles, it was very streamlined. It was very much, t-shirt, jeans, purse. That was the niche. So yeah, so that one appealed because I could just mix things up.
Do you think going with the new romantic style helped you to like better express yourself and your identity at the time?
I think it was a natural extension of my existing personality. Because I don't think I've ever had a problem expressing my opinion, even as a child. So I was always the kid who was vocal and got in trouble because I was expressing my opinion even as a young child. So this was just an extension of that. It wasn't like I was looking for an outlet. I was already doing it.
It was rooted within you.
Yeah. So this was just the stream that it felt comfortable to be in.
Would you always intentionally dress up different from your peers, or would you?
I mean, I had blue hair. I had blue hair then. I have blue hair now. When I put blue back in my hair now in my 50s, people are like, "Oh," and I was like, "I've been doing it since I was 16." It was important to me, and still is important to me, not to look like everybody else. And it upsets me when people think I look like everybody else.
Was there any pressure? Like, I know your family was like very forwarding with fashion, but was there any social pressure of like dressing up differently and not looking like everyone else?
No, I've always been very grounded in who I am. And if there was pressure, I ignored it. Or if there was a lot of pressure, then those people ceased to be my friends. That's what it was. I've always known who I am. I've always understood and accepted my preferences. Well, if you don't like it, you don't have to live with it.
Exactly.
So I've been like that since I was a little kid. So I've never understood that whole teenage angst.
Oh, that is
partly
really
because
great.
I've never desired to fit in.
Mhm.
That's not ever been a desire. I've always, if anything, I've always desired to lead the group. And if you wanted me to fit into a group,
Out of the group.
it wasn't going to happen unless that group conformed to me. Listen, my friends did not dress like me. I wasn't in this group of neo-romantics, right? My close friends in high school, none of them dressed like me. None of them behaved like me. The main thing was they simply accepted that this is who I was. And I was part of that group because we were friends. And that's why we were friends. I found those people that worked for me. We didn't really visually mesh,
Yes.
right? But with this particular group of people, it didn't matter.
It is a very valuable friend group to have. Did you ever try to bring any culture, like Chinese culture element into your dressing? Maybe like a souvenir piece when you travel and stuff? Or was that not a part of the expression?
No. And, and again, that was a deliberate choice, partly motivated by purely practical. I am taller and heavier than most Chinese women. So the clothes do not look good on me. They just don't. If I wear the qipao, right, I just look like a big stuffed sausage. It looks so awful on me. And I just, why would you wear something that looks awful on you? Just for cultural reasons. So I don't wear those things just because for aesthetic reasons.
How about accessories? Will you ever bring jewelry pieces?
I've worn very specific jewelry pieces that are Chinese, but they are very specific. Up until my 40s, I tried to avoid it because I hate people wearing ethnic jewelry.
Yeah.
Well, especially if it's not your ethnicity. Like, white people wearing Tibetan jewelry drives me crazy. I know it's just jewelry, but the people who wear those pieces aren't wearing it just because it's jewelry. It's a statement, right? So I've tended to avoid wearing jewelry that certainly
make statements.
Yeah, that make those kind of statements. I have a couple of pieces of jade that I wore for a long time daily, but I wore those pieces as a memorial because my father passed away. Right. So I started wearing it because of that. But I've put that away now. I wore them regularly for about 10 years. So I'll have one or two pieces that are sort of that ethnic jewelry, that very Chinese jewelry that I wear regularly for a long time for personal reasons, and then I'll put it away.
And how about like makeup? Were you like active with makeup and do it on a daily basis?
Well, it was the 80s. It was the 80s, and it was that new romantic look, right? And the other thing is my mother never had any issues with makeup. There was never any rule about you have to be a certain age before you started wearing makeup.
And when did you start to wear makeup?
Honestly, I can't remember.
11.
Because it wasn't a thing. Do you know what I mean? Like, you remember when you start wearing your makeup, if your parents are like, oh, you can't wear makeup and you have to defy them. Yeah, if there's a conflict, you remember. There was no conflict. I just started wearing makeup. I was like, okay. I'm thinking around 15, 16, but probably I started wearing makeup at that age because I could buy it myself. Like, she never bought any for me. I had to buy it myself. So I'm thinking 15, 16, because that was when I started shopping for myself.
Yes. And do you wear it on a daily basis or only for like special occasions?
Then it was daily, right?
Daily?
Oh yeah, it was daily. And it was full on. It was full on 80s makeup, the eye makeup was like huge and colorful. The blush was a streak, the lips were, the lips were bright, right? It was full on every single day. But this is part of my background, right? Part of our education is if you're leaving the house, you are dressed up. So even today, no matter how dressed down I am, and I happen to be dressed down today because I'm at home, I have to go into work in a couple of hours. I've already changed clothes, but the makeup's going to go on. It's going to be minimal. It's going to be minimal because you got the mask on and I'm lazy. But the eyeliner is going to go on. The blotting powder is going to go on. The blush is going to go on.
Is that still the 80s cat eyeliner?
Yeah, I've been drawing that line since I was 16. So yeah, it's that line that you have sort of. I still draw that line. Okay. Mine isn't as extended as yours, but I still draw that line for my makeup since the 80s. So
I think the 80s was more extended, but I just couldn't do more extended.
I know. We almost extended it to hit the eyebrow. Yeah. Like it almost closed it. I know. We didn't do the flick, right? That 50s flick wasn't part of it either. It is that very 80s sort of more almond shape.
And I think like this part is being covered by different blocks of colors, and then the rest is just the eyeliner to link it to the brow, and the eyeliner very thick.
Yes. Yeah. No, it's still that. I still draw that line. I tried doing my eyeliner another other ways, and it's just like, no, it didn't work for me. I also find it's because it works with an Asian eye. A lot of the other makeup and the other way they tell you to do makeup, I just don't feel works for Asian people.
How did you establish your routine? Was there like some mass media influences, other celebrities you were looking at, or purely experimental?
Then it was magazines, purely magazines, how-to tips on magazines, right? Yes. But the problem was, the how-to tips were all designed for white people.
Oh, there were no Asian models.
No, of course not. Right? So it's all for white people. I mean, there weren't even any black people, right? So, right? So it's all for white people. So I had to experiment because the things that they were telling you to do
doesn't fit you.
Doesn't work on an Asian eyelid. Doesn't work on an Asian eyebrow. Doesn't work on, our faces are contoured differently, our jawline, and so I had to experiment just to make those tips work for me. I did my hair when I was in my teens, and I spent hours on my hair, right? Because my hair is coarse and thick and really does what it wants to do, right? And you've seen the pictures of 80s hair. Yeah. 80s hair was big. It was big and it was done, right? Everything was gelled into place, everything was done, right? Yeah. So I did that in the 80s. I spent hours on that and finally figured out once how to get my hair to curl. And it was such an ordeal. I think I did it like 3 times. And I went, I'm never doing this again. This is stupid.
For the creative challenge part, if you were going to attend a very fancy social event for probably like a museum show or Rom's New Year celebration, in your coming of age, how would you put up an outfit, makeup, and hair to go to the event?
I mean, that is part of the job, is attending events. right? So I do have a whole separate wardrobe of events.
For event clothing?
Yeah, yeah, because they can get really fancy. It's mostly going to be dresses.
Mhm.
Almost always dresses. I bought this one dress. It's a sheath dress. Ted Baker. Ted Baker is an English designer, and his clothes are really known for these big, dramatic floral prints, right? And one dress that he makes over and over again is this sheath dress, right? So it's got slightly capped sleeves. It's a sheath, and then there's these big flowers all over it, right? And it's usually a crew neck. I bought one of those because it was on sale, and I wore it, and I wear it to events a fair bit. It's easy to wear, it's dramatic, it's great. And then somebody said to me, "Oh, so nice, you wear this modern qipao."
Oh, did it take elements from that?
And I never thought of it that way. I never thought of it that way. But then, when they said that, I went home and I looked at it and went, I can see it. I can absolutely see it, because, it doesn't have the Mandarin collar, but it has a close collar.
Oh.
Right. And the way the sleeves go, it's more like that qipao, where the sleeve goes covers your entire shoulder.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And it's a sheath. The nice thing about the Ted Baker dresses is that it's made in that sort of that neoprene fabric. So it holds its shape, it holds you in its shape, but it's stretchy.
Okay, so it doesn't have that restrictive nature.
Yeah, it gives you that qipao silhouette, but it's not shiny, thank God. and it's stretchy. So I looked at it and went, oh yeah, it is. Like she was told, but it never occurred to me that I was doing that silhouette and I was doing that until I was at this event and they said that. I'm like, okay, well, there you go. There's my unconscious, pulling out that silhouette and that look.
That's also
traditional.
Yeah, that's also interesting of like how people read it. Because yes.
Yeah, I never would have read it that way until she said it. And that was also the first time I wore it at a Chinese event. Like every other time I'd worn it, it was at a different kind of event. But this was an event that was for the Chinese community. And they immediately went, oh, it's such a nice modern take on a qipao. And I'm like, really? I'm like, oh yeah, there you go.
Thank you so much for sharing everything and also so much about fashion, about the new romantic and everything.
Okay, all right. Nice to see you. Love the makeup. Nice throwback.
Of course.
All right. Okay, we'll speak soon. All right.
Yeah, speak soon.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.